Let's speak to two differing voices on this. Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the Bow Group. Donica McCarthy, climate columnist for The Independent. Donica, firstly, afternoon to you. Always good to have you on. Is Greta right, Donica? We've been fiddling the books.
Well, there's two ways of looking at this. On our domestic emissions, the United Kingdom has reduced its carbon footprint significantly. However, if you take into account our imported consumption and you would take into account the fossil fuels that the United Kingdom funds abroad, then our emissions are around 4 to 5 times what we declare. So she's right, and the government's right, if you like.
So that's every parcel you order from Amazon that came from a Chinese factory, to put it crassly, it's the cost of the production in China, and the cost of the flight over here has to be factored in as well.
Absolutely. The United Kingdom emissions that the government boasts about doesn't include our international flights. Our international flights is 96% of the carbon emissions from aviation, so they're not included. It doesn't include any of international cruises or international shipping. So another aspect of what she's referring to is that obviously in the 80s and 70s, we produced a huge amount of our own industrial production that was coal powered, and a lot of that's now done by coal in China. So that's what she's referring to. But I think importantly that Greta doesn't refer to, and we don't comment on enough, is how much of the global fossil fuel economy is funded by the UK banking system, by UK oil corporation, and thirdly, a huge amount of the global fossil fuel marketing industry is in the UK as well. So the United Kingdom has a huge amount of responsibility in this game.
Ben Harris-Quinney, it's an effort, but it's not good enough.
Well, first of all, I'd say it's frankly ridiculous that we're listening to a Swedish teenager about what we should be doing in the United Kingdom. The problem with this debate is that it completely lacks the consent of the British public, because the government has not taken the time to explain to the British public what these carbon neutral measures will cost. And what we saw in France a few years ago was that Macron stood there and made many flowery statements about green issues. But when it came to the pinch, and he started laying those costs on the French public revolted. And I think that will be the same in the United Kingdom. Rather than worrying about whether Greta Thunberg thinks that we're entirely signed up to her agenda, we should be worrying about what the British public thinks. And when you
go on.
I think the British public are going to be very, very angry.
Okay, Donica, come back on that.
To reducing this extraordinary serious debate to attack on a teenager is demeaning the Bow Group. You're more serious than that. This is a serious issue that the United. Let me finish. United Nations.
I'll come straight back to you, Ben. Let Donica just finish this point very briefly, Donica.
The United Nations issued a report last week that states how serious trouble we're in. There are fires surrounding the Mediterranean, burning up Siberia and the Californian coast. And your point about the British public is not true. Survey after survey believes the British government needs to take more action. 2/3 of the British public believe we need to take more action. Your view is a minority view, and we would actually like to know who funds your views for the Bow Group. Who funds the Bow Group?
Well, the Bow Group is entirely grassroots funding. We don't take big donors from corporations, which is more that can be said from the Green lobby. We don't take big donations from anyone. It's an entirely grassroots movement, which, as I say, is generally very different to the sort of people we come up against from the Green lobby. And as I say, I think where the government has failed is, if you go out and say, would you like the environment to be nicer? Everyone's going to say yes. If you go out and say, do you realize that's going to cost trillions and trillions of pounds? It's going to be the most expensive policy that the United Kingdom has ever entered into. When that starts hitting people's wallets, when that starts costing families thousands and tens of thousands a year, I'll be very interested to see what the polls say then.
It's an interesting point, isn't it, Donica, that when it comes to the fact that people might have to begin to pay for this in unprecedented ways, then doesn't that popularity wane a little bit?
Well, one of the interesting things, I think what's very sad about the Bow Group is that, they're a conservative group. You would actually expect them to actually have some economic credibility in what they're talking about. Well, it's like talking about investment as a cost. The government is proposing that over the next 30 years, we will invest significant amounts of money in the green economy. That will provide jobs, it will provide taxes, it will provide security for the British public as we go ahead. If we don't invest in the green economy, we lose out to the international market and we will damage seriously our economy. There is no economy without a climate. Surely this basic economic fact should be important to a group like the Bow Group, which actually, they're entitled to have a conservative view. And historically, they've been a reasonably sensible think tank. You cannot have an economy without a climate.
There you go. But Ben, you're not being realistic because one works hand in glove with the other.
I mean, I think these pejorative insults about the Bow Group demean the debate. The Bow Group has been extremely responsible in terms of its approach to the economy. The government of the United Kingdom has not. We are now about 2.3 trillion in debt, about 107% of debt to GDP ratio, which was roughly where Greece was going into the 2008 economic crisis. If there is another recession, this country will descend into a debt crisis and a level of national bankruptcy that hasn't been seen for a very long time, since the 1970s, that we may never recover from. That's without getting into trillions in spending on levelling up and trillions in spending on these green measures. The problem with the green measures are, and you can talk about this amorphous green economy that's going to produce all these jobs.
It's not an amorphous green economy. 40% to 50% of the 40 to 50% of the electricity market is already green. That's not amorphous.
That suggests that the cost of this is going to be trillions. Now, the problem is that the United Kingdom can do all of this. In the meantime, China is pumping out pollution. India is pumping out pollution. Africa is pumping out pollution. South America, the United States are pumping out pollution, all whilst the global population is increasing year on year, multiplying year on year. The United Kingdom will do all of these things, and it will make absolutely no.
Let me just put a different point to you, Donica. Firstly, in 1972, Maurice Strong, the first United Nations Environmental Programme Director, said we had 10 years to save the planet. 1972, his successor, Mustafa Tolba, in 1982, said the same thing. He said we had 18 years to save the planet. Isn't there a sense that people feel they've heard all of this before and nothing happens?
Well, I heard your.
And I'm
your
not
point.
including the man with the sandwich board that used to knock around my place with "the end is Nile."
Well, the science that they were referring to is actually correct. Can I explain what I mean by that? They were saying that if we didn't cut carbon emissions below 350, we would end up going a temperature rise of over 1 degree centigrade. And that would result in significant droughts and floods and changes to the atmosphere and to the climate. That has happened. And this summer has shown it is happening. So they were correct. We shouldn't go past 350. And every 10 parts per million we go above 350, we actually get into more and more danger. So what they're saying is the level of destruction, relevant to the amount of emissions, the more we emit, the more destruction we have. We've already passed many danger points. We haven't passed, hopefully, total catastrophe.
Okay, Ben, let me ask you just a final point, Ben. What steps should people take then to help climate change from a Bow Group perspective?
Well, the number one thing we should do, we know from government figures that 80% of new British citizens are either foreign born or born to a foreign parent. So if we cut immigration down to what the Conservative Party proposed to do, down to the tens of thousands, we would very significantly reduce the amount of carbon this country is using over several decades, and would also reduce the amount that we need to build over the countryside, because environmentalism has to be about the environment. It has to be about maintaining Britain's green and pleasant land. And the government are talking about all these highfalutin measures of saving the world, all the while concreting over the countryside. So I think if we start to look more locally, start to maintain our own nation and our own green and pleasant land, then that would be a way that we could.
Okay. And you're totally contradicting yourself
in a very sustainable and realistic way.
Donica,
you've just argued for the last 10 minutes that Britain should take action, and now you're saying Britain must put its own house in order. Come on, Ben, you can't have it both ways. It's hilarious.
No, I'm saying we should cut immigration down to
credibility in what you're saying.
No, let's cut immigration down to thousands.
Cutting immigration wouldn't cut 1 ton, because they do emit the carbon emissions in another country, or they emit it here. It doesn't cut any emissions. What would cut emissions if the United Kingdom restored its aid budget and funded
that are using carbon. Okay, so if you've got a situation where 80% of new British citizens are foreign born or born to a foreign parent, you extrapolate that over decades, and that is going to be a very significant part of our population.
It doesn't cut carbon emissions by 1 ton.
Well, of course it does, because
they will emit the carbon wherever they live. What would
but they're not going to be in the UK. So the responsibility of the United Kingdom government is to deal with the United Kingdom. Okay, so if we can maintain
the responsibility of the United Kingdom government is to take responsibility in helping save the global.
All right, just finish the point, Ben.
Reduce our carbon emissions, and that has to be the role of the British government, not to worry about what's going on all over the world.
And Donica, same question to you. What should people be doing that they're not doing at the moment? What's the one big thing on your list?
Cut foreign flights, cut the amount of meat, and cut the amount of driving that you're doing.
Donica, thank you. Donica McCarthy, who's the climate columnist for The Independent. Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the Bow Group. That's the world's oldest conservative think tank. Both with us here on Talk Radio. Over to you.